Alright, hello everyone. Somebody in the chat, just say something to let me know that you can hear me. Hello, hello. Awesome. Welcome everyone. Just give just a minute or two to get everybody joined in. We'll get started. I did link in the description. Can I view the description here? I cannot. I did link in the description a link to WSL2. If you are a Windows user who is following along, I recommend running through that real quick before we get started. Just because this sort of assumes that you have some sort of Linux environment set up. I know most of the people here are UIC students, so if you connect to like the BertVM servers, you can also sort of play around with most of the commands that we're doing today. So, all right. So I'll go ahead and get started on the presentation. Make sure that this looks right. At least. Oops. There we go. Awesome. Get started in just a minute. All right. So, introduction to the Linux terminal, or the Linux in general. So this is going to be navigating your way around the Linux file system, and just general day-to-day Linux usage. So yeah. So again, quick note on Windows users: if you check the link in the description, there is a link to a WSL2 install guide. I recommend installing WSL2. That's probably the best way. And you can use the default Ubuntu one, but I do know that they have a Kali Linux WSL2 version, and that has pretty much all the tools that we'll need to install for any of the activities that we're going to be doing in the future. So if you just use the Kali Linux installer, or the Kali Linux WSL2, that will allow you to see everything, to get everything. Yes, it is recorded. All of our streams are recorded, except for the guest speaker. So first off, why Linux? Why the Linux terminal? Two things here, two questions I'm answering. Why do we use Linux for this, and why not use a GUI? So first question, why use Linux? Very simply, the ability for us to access low-level parts of the system is very important for being able to pen test, because if you're using Windows, or in some cases Mac can be restrictive as well. If you're using either of those, and you're trying to test a system, you're trying to test the security of the system, but say that there's an obvious flaw in the network, but it's really hard to there's not a lot of programs out there that's going to access very low level Windows um, APIs to sort of uh, an example might be um, maybe you want let's say that a lot of the times you might need to look at some hardware statistics for um, maybe for your networks attached to a computer. Now, you might be saying, well, on Windows that's pretty easy. You just look in the settings or open up ipconfig is the command. But there is a lot of information in that command that's not given to you. And there are tools out there that give you the option to let you see that data. But a lot of times, like I said, it's sort of a bigger hassle to work with Windows than it is to work with Linux, because most tools, if the vast majority of tools that you'll be using, a lot of them do have Windows counterparts, but they came to Linux first. So they're intended for Linux users, so you might deal with a lot of issues with that. So yeah, that's my rant of why Linux is better. So why not use a GUI? I mean, you can use a GUI. There are several GUI versions of a lot of the tools that we're going to be using, but a lot of tools don't have a GUI at all, and that's a major reason why you probably don't want to use a GUI, because well, if you have one tool that uses a GUI and one tool that uses a terminal, why not just use the terminal for all of them, since all of the GUI ones will have a terminal as well. So our first step in the Linux learning process is very basic navigation. I'm sure a lot of you have already come into contact with some basic navigational commands, and I just like to go over those really quickly to sort of show you some of those commands. And if you want to open up your terminal at this point, you can definitely do that. Yours doesn't have to look anything fancy, as long as you're at a Linux terminal. And I'm on Mac, so if you're a Mac user, it'll work. All the commands will work on Mac as well. You'll see a term that I throw around. You'll see written, it's star Nix. So Nix type distributions that will include Mac OS and Linux. And for the most part BSD, but I don't think anybody is using BSD. So yeah. So the first command to get started is just seeing where you are. A lot of times you'll start in the home directory of your system. If you're on Windows using WSL, I think you'll start in a home directory that's specific to your install, but you can actually go to like the home directory of your user. And on Windows, I believe it's C users and then your username. And on Mac, it is /users /your username, and on Linux, it's /home /your username. So the first command that we can run to see where we are is pwd. We see that I'm in users /Christian Bigman, so my username. So we can check which files are in the current directory that we're in just by running ls. And we'll see, normal files, depending on which system you're running on. This may change, obviously, but for the most part, you'll have a similar set of folders here. So if we want to go into a specific directory to see what's in there, we just use the command cd. So this stands for change directory. Now, real quick, pwd stands for print working directory, so that's the current working directory that we're in. ls I'm pretty sure it means list, or it's a shortened version of the list. So it lists out the files in your current directory. CD, change directory. So we can change directory to, let's just say desktop. If you're on Mac, you might get this. Just click OK. Now there is nothing in here. That's why I went to it. Another one can look at, this should have something in it. Yeah, so ls, you see what the folder is, and a lot of times, depending on your terminal, it will also show on the side which directory you're in. Now this little tilde means in Linux it refers to your home. So whenever you see this, that means home/development. Now, say that you're in, some folder, and you're deep down into a folder, that's weird. Say you're somewhere deep down into a folder, you've got a bunch of stuff. Maybe your terminal doesn't show you, where you're at. So you have to do like manually pwd. So there's two ways that we can go back. So change directory, and both of these are going to use change directory. So there are actually hidden files inside of here. So if we list all of the non-hidden files. But if we want to list all of the files, including the hidden ones, you just do ls-a, so for all. And you see that there's two directories here, dot and dot dot. So these are basically links to other directories. So dot is the current directory, so you can do like cd dot, and this is the same directory, so it does nothing. This is, you won't really use that, but what you will use is dot dot. So dot dot refers to the directory, the previous directory. So cd dot dot takes me back a directory. Now, say I'm done here and I want to go home. Well, that's really easy. As far as I know, all distributions and terminals allow this. I'm pretty sure this is a base function of CD. I don't remember if that's always been the case. But if you just type CD, it'll take you back to your home. Another way, in case that's not an option, is to use tilde. So CD like that, and that'll also take you home. So now, hopefully, you should know how to navigate around Linux a little bit better. So let's look at installing a piece of software. So I am using Mac. If you're using Mac, you should install something called Brew. It's on brew.sh. If you're using Linux, if you're using Ubuntu or Kali Linux, you will use apt-get. So if you're on Linux, an example piece of software that we're actually going to be using tomorrow is called Nmap. So let's go ahead and look at how we would install Nmap. Because a lot of the tools that you're going to need, unless you're using Kali Linux, you're going to have to install yourself. So let's go ahead and look at that. So if we do sudo apt-get install Nmap, this will install Nmap into your list of programs, and you can use Nmap to scan a target, which is what we'll talk about tomorrow. Now I am on macOS, so if I do brew install nmap, this is how you would install it on Mac OS. You don't need sudo, but on Linux you will need sudo. You just hit that, and you hit yes, the Y. I believe I already have this installed. So you'll see something similar. It'll ask you to confirm. You just hit Y, and it'll go ahead and install it on your computer. Now there is one error you may run into if you are running this right now. You may have to update your repositories. I won't really explain what that is. Just know if it says, for example, say repository not, or application not found or something like that. A lot of the times it's just because your repositories are not up to date. Let me switch over to the right screen so that you can actually see what I'm typing. Yeah. So the command that I executed, so if you're on Linux, sudo apt-get install nmap, and then this will basically, it'll ask you for your password, so you put in your sudo password, or just your password, and then you will have to hit Y. If you are on Mac OS, you just do, you don't actually need sudo for this, you need brew install nmap. Alright, so those are the commands. This will install nmap, and then if you want to check and see if it's working, you just do nmap-v, and there you go. It'll tell you, well, I guess this started a command, so dash version. There we go, dash version. Will show you, will tell you that the command is installed. Alright, am I missing anything? If you're using Chocolatey, I believe it's choc install nmap. I don't know if there's anybody. So for the one for Ubuntu is sudo apt-get install nmap. And if you are getting an error saying that the package doesn't exist, you just do sudo apt-get update first. Choco, yeah, so choco. So this is the command that you would be using if you're using Chocolatey. Basically, it's another option for Windows users to install Linux applications. What's the difference between brew and sudo? So sudo, so when you install a piece of software, you need to have the correct permissions to, let me make sure, check something real quick. Give me just a second and I'll explain your question. Dang it. Why is this not working? All right, there we go. Okay, so we have 10 minutes, so I have to go fast. So sudo basically allows you to execute something with admin permissions. On Linux, apt-get, which is the package, apt-get is the actual thing that manages the software. Sudo basically tells it, hey, I need to execute this command with more permissions. I need to be a privileged user to execute this command. Now, Mac OS, brew installs in local directories, So it actually doesn't require admin permissions. So you can just execute brew. Um, but on Linux, you have to put sudo in most cases to execute it as administrator. All right, let's switch back over, and then I can run through the last couple things. And back to what I was just saying, I forgot that this is actually the next slide. Yeah, privileges on Linux. Sudo will give you an admin privileges, but it requires you to enter in your password. So when we want to access a command that requires higher privileges, then we need to use sudo. Any commands that do need sudo, I'll tell you if they need sudo. Most of them don't, just the package installation. So another thing I want to show for privileges is actual file permissions. So it's important when you're looking for security vulnerabilities that you don't have weird file permissions. So going back to our ls command, if we do an ls-l, you see this gives us a lot more information. But we don't need most of this information. This is just the creation date. I don't know what these two numbers are. I'm sure somebody more well versed in Linux could explain, but I think this is the size of the file, maybe. So, but this one is obviously your username and then your group that you're in. Not super important for the most part, but you want to check and see if there's a file in here that has the wrong user or the wrong group. You may want to check that. That may be a security vulnerability. If, for example, you have a file in here that has weird permissions, so we see, you can look this up online, it's pretty easy to understand. So this first one tells us that it's a directory. The second one tells us that the owner of the file, so this Christian Bingman user, the owner of the file has read, write, and execute permissions. Everyone in that user's group, or that user, yeah, so the owner has read, write, execute, the group has read and execute, and I believe everyone has read and execute. So the user's group has read and execute, and everyone else has read and execute. So if you're on the same system as another person, you can, if they have read and execute permissions for everyone, so this last three, read and execute, then you can read all of their files. So yeah, it's a good security practice to generally keep the permissions lower. So you may, for example, if you're trying to secure a system, make sure that none of the files are readable by anybody but the owner. You can look up how to change the actual permissions. It's very simple, but the command that you would look for is called chmod. Make sure you can look this up. It's a very simple command. You can change the permissions of a file. So if I wanted to give everyone permission to read my development directory, I would do 707. And if you look up chmod, it'll explain what these numbers mean for development. I would do ls-la. We see development here is read, write, execute. Now it does highlight in yellow here, telling you it's open to everybody. So that is something that Linux usually highlights for you. So let me go ahead and restore the permissions on that. And there we go. Awesome. Let me switch back over. Finish this last couple slides. So the last one before the final slide is networking. Um, I do want to go over just a command or two to show you, because a lot of times you're going to need to get your private IP address when you're working um, with like your OpenVPN, to get your private IP address. Maybe you're trying to do like a reverse shell of some kind, to get access to a computer, and it needs to connect back to you, and you need to know what your own private IP address is. Now, this is your private IP address, so obviously nobody will be able to do anything with it, because it's local only to you. Um, this is not your public IP address. So on Linux systems, so Linux and Mac, you do ifconfig. And if you are on, sorry, if you are on Mac, it is ipconfig. Ipconfig is a different tool on Mac and Linux. So ipconfig on Windows will tell you your network information. Ifconfig on Mac will tell you your network information. So main one we're looking for is one that has ones, it'll be either EN0 or WLPS on some systems, but you're looking for an IP address. It'll be pretty obvious once you see it. So we see iNet here, and we see an IP address. So that's my private IP address. If you're on Linux, the command is IPA. So this is the command IP for handling your IP, and A standing for address. So IPA will give you your IP address. It'll list it out pretty much just like this. My bad. So the command ipconfig for Windows, ifconfig for Mac. If you scroll through it, usually you'll have fewer, but like if you have a bunch of like Docker and stuff installed, it can add a bunch of stuff, and you're looking for an iNet. And if you are on Linux, use IPA, and that will give you your IP address. Awesome. Let's switch back over one more time, and then I have just a minute to answer questions. So now it's your turn. So at the end of the day, we will have a presentation covering how to get started with TryHackMe. If you want to go ahead and sign up for it and get started, you can. But this room is linked in the description. This will guide you through Linux fundamentals. It's an active learning, so you actually go and execute the commands, and it will lead you through the basics of Linux. So please go ahead and do that. If you do sign up for TryHackMe, make sure that you sign up with your UIC email. Make sure it's the @uic.edu email. I will go ahead and link these back later once we actually do the presentation on getting set up. But that getting set up is at the end of the day. So, yeah. Does anybody have any questions before we move over to the next presentation? It's IP space A. ifconfig can work on Linux. It depends on your distribution. It used to be called ifconfig on Linux way back when. Not really way back when, I mean like 5-6 years ago. ifconfig was still used, but they switched over to IP space A. And most distributions have gotten rid of ifconfig. Yes, IP space A is for Ubuntu. ifconfig, I think, also works on Ubuntu. If somebody wants to test that and correct me, that would be great. We are out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and switch over to our next presentation, and I'll see everyone there.